welcome to meeting number 132 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to remind all members and participants of the following points. Please do wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And also, please do raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. Now, today we will be commencing our study of Canada's relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 26, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of Canada's relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, I'd like to welcome our two witnesses for today. We're very, very grateful that you could join us. We're grateful to have from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Ms. Sylvie Bedard, who's the Director General for Central America and the Caribbean. And we also have with us here Ms. Wendy Drukier, who's the Director General, South America and Hemispheric Affairs. As I understand it, you're just doing one opening statement, and Ms. Drukier, I understand that you will be speaking, so you have the floor. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. However, with respect to your opening remarks and the questions that do follow, I would ask that both of you look up every once in a while. If you see this being held up, that means you should be wrapping it up in between 15 to 20 seconds. So all of that having been explained, Ms. Drukier, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to address Canada's relations with Latin America and the Caribbean, or LAC for short. I'm Wendy Drukier, Director General for South American Hemispheric Affairs, and I'm accompanied today by Sylvie Bedard, Director General for Central America and the Caribbean. The Americas are our neighborhood, and there are a myriad of elements to highlight with respect to Canada's engagement and cooperation with the hemisphere. The strong people-to-people ties that exist between our countries can be clearly seen through the over 1 million individuals from LAC who call Canada home. Le Canada est un partenaire de
Canada is a trusted partner in the region, collaborating with several countries and in the inter-American system on issues such as democracy, human rights, gender equality, and economic growth. Over the past year, we've seen high-level Canadian engagement in the region, including the Minister of International Developments in the Heads of Government meeting in Grenada, the CARICOM, as well as his visits to Guatemala and Honduras, as well as Bolivia and Peru. Moreover, the Minister of Foreign Affairs went to Mexico and Chile, and the Prime Minister went to Peru for APEC and Brazil for the G20 summit.
Growing economic relationship with LAC. Since 2018, two-way merchandise and services trade has grown by 33% and 23% respectively. This economic relationship is underpinned by 8 free trade agreements and a network of 25 trade commissioner offices across the region. The Canadian government's approach is informed by the expectation that Canadian companies operating abroad will abide by all relevant laws, respect human rights, and adopt best practices and internationally respected guidelines on responsible business conduct. We recognize that a healthy and growing economic relationship needs to be inclusive to better address poverty in the region. Canada's international assistance for the region was valued at $1.07 billion in fiscal year 22-23, with the Caribbean, Haiti, Honduras, and Colombia being the main beneficiaries. Il n'est pas nécessaire de rappeler les effets des
No need to remind you of the effects of climate change on the Americas. When Hurricane Beryl struck the Caribbean this year, Canada was one of the leading donors of humanitarian assistance. In 2022-2023, the Canadian government implemented $252 million in climate change-focused programs in the region, supporting the transition to clean energy, climate-smart agriculture, biodiversity protection, disaster preparedness, and recovery.
Strengthening democratic institutions in the region is a key priority for the Government of Canada, in particular in the face of the erosion of those institutions in some countries. Through the Organization of American States, of which Canada has been a member since 1990, Canada provided technical support to 8 electoral management bodies over the past 3 years to bolster their capacities to administer electoral processes. Notably, the OAS, with support from Canada and other member states, directly contributed to avoiding a democratic breakdown in Guatemala late last year. Canada continues to support free and fair elections. In Venezuela, the Canadian government unequivocally condemns the escalating repression by the Maduro regime. And in coordination with international partners, Canada demands that the democratic will of the Venezuelan people be respected, and we continue to assess how best to support them. The Government of Canada remains deeply concerned by the steep rates of irregular migration and forced displacement across the Americas, a trend that includes increasing numbers of women and children on the move and is exacerbated by the crises in Venezuela and Haiti. Through its international assistance, Canada aims to support transit and host countries, address the root causes of migration and displacement, and support the integration of refugees and migrants in their host communities. Being a country of the Americas means that we are affected by rising regional insecurity. Countries once considered stable are now grappling with increased organized crime and violence, and this can have a direct impact on Canada. The Canadian government's approach to defense and security cooperation in the region includes significant investments in capacity building and specialized training, working with partners through mechanisms such as the Anti-Crime Capacity Building Program and the Weapons Threat Reduction Program to address illegal drug threats and transnational crime. In a recent appearance before this committee, GAC officials presented a 4-pillar strategy to the Haiti crisis. In closing, sustained and meaningful Canadian engagement with the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean is important, especially considering an increasingly complex, volatile, and multipolar world. We look forward to addressing the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Druquier. Now we start off with the first round of questions. MP Chong, you're first. You have 6 minutes for this round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. I'd like to talk about the situation in Venezuela. My first question is, why hasn't the government been more categoric about recognizing that presidential candidate Gonzalez won the election and not presidential candidate Maduro?
Mr. Chair, I believe that the government has been very clear in recognizing that Edmundo González Urrutia won the most votes in the election, and that was included in the September 9th statement made by Minister Joly. Okay.
Because, initially, in the weeks after the last summer's election, it wasn't, the government wasn't clear about who had won the election from its point of view, from the Government of Canada's point of view. And so you're telling me now that the government clearly believes that Mr. Gonzalez won the election and that Maduro lost the election.
From all the available evidence that we have seen, and in particular the evidence that has been produced by the opposition and the electoral observation missions, for example, from the Carter Center, it's very clear that he did win the most votes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clear answer. The U.S. has sanctioned, I believe, some 16 individuals of Maduro for having rigged the last election. Is Canada planning on working in concert with our closest ally to ensure that there's no sanctions evasion coming through the Canadian financial system?
Mr. Chair, Canada has imposed targeted sanctions on 112 Venezuelan officials, including de facto President Maduro and other high-ranking regime officials. And these sanctions were imposed under both the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act and the Special Economic Measures Act. And the department regularly reviews the sanctions regime against developments in the country, and we continue to do that with Venezuela.
And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that those sanctions predate the rigging of the last Venezuelan election. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Is there any consideration going on within the department about ensuring that the individuals the U.S. government has sanctioned won't be able to use our financial system as a backdoor to evade U.S. sanctions?
As I said, Mr. Chair, the government and the department is doing ongoing reviews of the sanction regime and where it would be appropriate to impose, but I can't provide any further details.
Okay. And can you give us an update on the Lima, on what's going on with the Lima?
The Lima Group?
The Lima Group. Is it essentially defunct? What's going on with
that? Yes, that is correct. The Lima Group is no longer functioning.
Okay. And can you also give us an update as to what our diplomatic assets, our consular assets, are on the ground in Venezuela and also in the surrounding countries?
Well, we have a lot of diplomatic assets in the surrounding countries. In Venezuela, we still have our chancery, our embassy building, as well as our official residence, and we currently have 3 locally engaged staff on the ground there. We have, I believe, around 700 Canadians registered in ROCA as being in Venezuela, so in the Registry of Canadians Abroad.
Okay. Recently, the issues around, migration and the like have become top of mind concerns. And, according to the government's own data, some 7 million Venezuelans have left Venezuela since 2015. Can you tell us what discussions are going on about not just migration from Venezuela, but migration from Latin American countries in general that are putting pressure on borders north?
On the migration question, our figures are around 7.8 million Venezuelans that have left the country. 85% of those Venezuelans are actually still in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, huge issue for host countries. The majority of those, the largest number of those are in Colombia. There are also a lot in Brazil and Peru and other neighboring countries. And we've been providing development assistance and humanitarian assistance to those countries to help integrate the migrants in the communities and help provide services to them and to find meaningful work. In terms of the broader migration question, there are a number of initiatives that we've undertaken in South America in terms of supporting host communities. We also have a significant amount of peace and security funding through the Anti-Crime Capacity Building Fund program, to deal with organized crime and the trafficking in migrants.
I can't remember exactly, but about a year or so ago, the Biden administration, in response to rising energy prices, lifted sanctions on the importation of Venezuelan oil. I believe 250,000 barrels of oil a day. Has the Canadian government ever participated in discussions with the U.S. government about Canada being available to help alleviate some of those pricing pressures? It seems to me that, being right next door to the United States, that, it'd be better if the 250,000 barrels in additional oil came from Canada rather than Venezuela, choking off a source of funds for Maduro.
Unfortunately, that's not under my area of responsibility, so I don't have an answer to that question, but we can certainly try to get an answer.
Yeah, if you could, just let us know if any discussions have been going on in that regard. And it has to do, I think Chevron was the company asked to go in to provide those barrels. Obviously, Chevron operates in North America as well, and it might be something where the government of Canada could provide assistance to our American ally rather than Venezuela. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong. We now go to MP Oliphant. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here. And please extend our thanks to the dozens of folks who work with you to keep us abreast of what's going on in the Americas, and the hundreds who work throughout the Americas. I have sort of 3 areas of questioning. I'll probably only get 2. The first one is on institutions and how, and I want to start at a sort of a macro level. The second one would be related to migration, and the third will be Indigenous peoples of the Americas. On the macro level, can you describe a little bit about how Canada works in the Americas in terms of our multilateral presence, either with the Organization of American States, the OAS, or other hemispherical or regional bodies where Canada plays a role? Just a snapshot of that.
Of course. Mr. Chair, Canada, of course, has been a member of the Organization of American States since 1990, and we are very much engaged in that organization as the second largest contributor of both assessed and voluntary contributions. And the OAS plays a very important role on a number of issues, including on as I mentioned in my opening statement, electoral cooperation, supporting democracy, on human rights, on security, and on the development side as well, and we support a lot of that work through our assistance and our funding in the regular budget and through voluntary contributions. We are also involved in the Summit of the Americas process. The next summit will be held at the end of next year in the Dominican Republic, and that is always a useful forum for leaders to engage on the pressing issues in the hemisphere. We've been supporting within the OAS, the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, or DECO, on electoral observation and technical support to electoral bodies, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights for the important work that they do, the Inter-American Commission on Women and a lot of work that they do on the ground, and the Secretariat of Multidimensional Security, where we are providing capacity building funds as well. In terms of other inter-American institutions, there's, of course, the Inter-American Development Bank, where we are an important shareholder, the Pan American Health Organization, where we engage, the Inter-American Institute for Agriculture. So there's a panoply of institutions with which we engage.
Thank you. I'm going to skip for migration. I think Mr. Chong raised the issue as well. Much of the issue is stemming from Venezuela and the political crisis of Venezuela, and the illegitimate regime which exists there today. The challenges tend to be in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, but also from Colombia up across the Darien Gap and into Central America. Can you tell me a little bit about what we mean when we hear in the news about the Darien Gap?
Monsieur le Président, effectivement,
Chair, in fact, this is one of the main ways by which migrants that come from the south go to the north, and these migrant flows change. However, we saw over the past year that the number of migrants that went through that specific area was lower than other routes that are increasing.
In terms of domestic effect on Canada, will we see increasing patterns of migration that could be unplanned migration from that area that somehow get to Canada, either through the United States or via the either ocean? Is that on our radar?
Monsieur le Président, on suit.
Mr. Chair, we do follow the migrant flows in the area. As my colleague mentioned, for the time being, 83 to 85% of migrants choose to stay in Latin America rather than making their way north. However, we are keeping an eye on the flows, and we are working very hard on understanding the reasons why people, including youth and women, decide to migrate north. So we're working with our development programs to understand if there are ways to develop the economy where these people are.
Dernière question.
My last question.
The issue of Indigenous peoples. The one thing that I think unites us in the Americas is the colonialization and the effect on Indigenous peoples from the very far south right up into the Canadian Arctic. When I've been at the OAS, Indigenous communities are often referred to as interest groups or stakeholders. Canada understands Indigenous people as governments, and they're not nonprofit organizations. Are we taking any stances to attempt to elevate the participation of Indigenous peoples in those institutions you started with?
Mr. Chair, of course, Canada has taken a very clear position on the status of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and we work to promote reconciliation and respect of their rights throughout the Americas, where this is a reality in many countries with a quite high percentage of Indigenous peoples. And of course, we continue to follow the guideline, follow the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of the UN in terms of all of our dealings. There have been discussions, there have been ongoing discussions with representatives of Indigenous peoples at the OAS, and we continue to promote their participation and recognition of their status.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being with us. Thank you for what you and your colleagues are doing to ensure Canada's presence in the area, in that part of the Americas, and more specifically in Latin America. Since 2004, the Americas Barometer, the largest project understanding attitudes and experiences in the Americas, the most recent edition being based on 34 countries in the area. One of the main conclusions of the Americas Barometer is that support for democracy has eroded in the Americas, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean in the past decade. In some cases, support for democracy is strong, such as in Uruguay or in Costa Rica. In countries such as Suriname and Guatemala, it falls below 50%. So 1 in 2 citizens does not believe in democracy. Is this something that you're concerned about, and what measures are countries like Canada taking to reverse the trend or contribute to reversing that trend in the area?
Question, Mr. Chair. It's obviously a very, very important issue and something that the Canadian government is concerned with in terms of the declining support for democracy in a number of countries in the region. Well, the research shows that a majority of people in most countries in Latin America still believe that the democracy is the best form of government. The decline is obviously very, very concerning. We know that, for example, organized crime is playing a role in both challenging democratic institutions and the erosion of the support for democracy. Corruption erodes support for democracy as well. And the violence and insecurity created by organized crime can cause citizens to lose confidence in democratic institutions and governments. It's also encouraged some governments to resort increasingly heavy-handed approaches in response to instability and insecurity, which suspend rights and restrict civil society further, and they further erode the rule of law. So it is a vicious cycle. We support, as I had mentioned previously, the OAS in its efforts to protect and strengthen democracy through electoral observation and strengthening of electoral processes through political dialogue and support for media freedom and protection of human rights online. And in addition to funding electoral observation missions, our funding to the OAS supports technical assistance to improve the capacity of member states' national electoral bodies. We also fund various projects aimed at supporting democracy, including by improving inclusive governance, tackling corruption, enhancing the rule of law, and increasing women's political participation in many countries in the region.
J'aimerais rester, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, a couple of days ago, on November 19th, we heard that 5 people were arrested for trying to assassinate Mr. Lula. In Brazil. They attempted a coup. And amongst these people, there are 4 military and a close collaborator of Jair Bolsonaro, who's called Fernandes, and who had a very high-ranking position in Mr. Bolsonaro's administration. We also know that in February 2024, an investigation was launched on Mr. Bolsonaro for his presumed attempt in a similar coup. Do you feel that democracy in Brazil is healthy? That's my first question. And as a corollary, how do you see the closer ties between Brazil and the BRICS that's trying to expand to other countries that may have dubious practices, which could have an impact on the region in the future?
On the question of the arrests and the accusations of conspiracy of a coup in Brazil, we're of course aware of that, and we're very concerned. It's a very serious matter, and we're certainly following that. I think we need to let the Brazilian judicial process run its course. the democracy in Brazil, obviously, this is a threat to democracy, but we believe that there are strong enough institutions, in particular in the judicial arm of government, that will be looking into this, and we don't have a comment to make for the moment, further than that, awaiting the conclusion of that. In terms of Brazil's involvement with the BRICS, what we can say is that Brazil is obviously an important economy. It's now become the ninth most important economy, or ninth largest economy in the world. And it is a developing country, and it is seen as a leader in what some call the global South in terms of promoting positions on the multilateral stage. We, of course, we're closely following the evolution of the BRICS to see how the group's actions and their messaging may influence Canadian interests. But of course, we continue to engage with countries like Brazil and other members of the BRICS as we need to pursue common objectives. We're definitely like-minded with Brazil on a number of issues. We share a lot of values. We may not share the same interests on some issues, and we can engage in constructive dialogue with Brazil on those issues.
Donc, je comprends que selon vous, la démocratie.
So I'm understanding from you that democracy is fine and well in Brazil?
It's a yes or no answer. It's everything is a shade of gray.
Dans quelle nuance de gris?
And what shades of gray are we talking about?
I'm afraid you're out of time. Next, we go to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, and greetings to all the members of the committee. Mr. Chair, I'll be moving a motion that was given notice on June 19th, 2024, that given the Indian state actors utilized government resources in 1984 to engage in action consistent with the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 260, commonly known as the Genocide Convention, including the systematic and organized killing of the Sikhs. 2, where possible, it has been the policy of the Government of Canada to act in concert with international law when it comes to the recognition of a genocide. And 3, India's own Nanavati Commission report acknowledges the killings were systematic and organized. 4, Indian courts have observed genocide has been duly proved and established. The committee call upon the House to recognize that a genocide was carried out against the Sikhs in India, call upon the Indian government to take measures to bring those responsible for this violence to justice, and this motion be reported to the House. I'm prepared to motivate for the motion whenever, Mr. Chair, you think it's appropriate.
So did you want to speak to it? Sorry, I didn't hear the word you used.
I can motivate the reasons why this motion should be supported if that's the appropriate time to do so.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, it's been 40 years since this genocide occurred. It is something that has a deep trauma for the Sikh community, many who have chosen Canada proudly to be home. It is an impact that continues to have serious pain, and to date, there has been no formal recognition of this genocide. The inaction leaves those wounds, and many members of the Sikh community still face transnational violence, and we recently saw with the RCMP's report that there is still an ongoing allegation of targeted violence by the Indian government against the Sikh community. Recognizing this genocide would be an act of solidarity, would show that whether violence happens now or in the past, that Canada takes a stance against that type of violence. I've personally spoken with a number of Sikh organizations, including the World Sikh Organization, the Sikh Federation Canada, the Ontario Gurdwara Committee, and the British Columbia Gurdwaras Council. These organizations in total represent a significant portion of the Sikh community in Canada. We're talking about all of the major Gurdwaras in city or countries or provinces like Ontario and BC. And the Sikh Federation makes up organization of Gurdwaras from across the country. They have all specifically urged Parliament to formally recognize this strategy and to acknowledge the enduring pain it has caused. I ask all members of the committee to support this motion and see that it be brought into Parliament. I think this would be a really powerful step towards acknowledging the harm, and it would be a powerful step towards justice.
Thank you. MP Oliphant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank Mr. Singh for bringing this to our attention. I think that the events we will all know in this room, he refers to of 1984, were horrendous and were tragic. I believe that they have left scars and trauma for thousands of families in India and in Canada, and that many Sikhs in Canada and around the world continue to feel the pain. And this is something that has happened close to them and to their hearts. I would also respond that for me, this is not just an Indian issue, it is also a Canadian issue by virtue of our population in this country. So my comments that I will about to give are not on the actual statement or the motion that he has presented, but rather on the process by which I think we should move forward on issues like this. The committee acts upon two things: motivations from motions from the members of the committee on topics that we think are important for us as parliamentarians to study, or on work that is referred to us from Parliament. And that may be legislation, or that may be another motion that Parliament passes that would send us. And the opportunity we have on this committee is to delve deeply into topics through study, through witnesses such as we have today, and through the work that committees do sometimes around the clock in this and other buildings on Parliament Hill. We study issues, we listen to witnesses, we hear testimony, and then as a committee we would make recommendations to either Parliament or government and/or government. And I believe that the precedent on such a motion, there are three ways that such a motion could be brought to the attention of the House. One is through a unanimous consent motion, which could simply do any sort of recognition or any sort of action. The second could be a private member's bill, a piece of legislation, or through a private member's motion. Any of those ways, something can be brought to the House. It could go through the Senate or the House of Commons to get to our attention and may be referred to us for study or may be acted upon in Parliament or in Committee of the Whole. As such, we don't think at this time that precedent and that way of working is a good process, and we encourage him to have conversations with representatives of all the parties and to find a path forward on this issue which would honour our parliamentary traditions, I believe, more fully. And as such, I move that the debate now be adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. That being a dilatory motion, can we agree to this on division? No? Okay.
I want to see exactly who's voting against recognizing a Sikh genocide. I would like it to be known, and I'll make sure that everyone in this country, every community knows who voted this way.
Yes, there's no debate. So on division, recorded division.
Mr. Alghabra.
Yes.
Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Dr. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Oliphant.
Yes.
Mr. Zuberi.
Yes.
Mr. Abul Taif.
Yes.
Mr. Chung. Yes. Mr. Kmitch. Monsieur Bajan.
No.
Mr. Singh.
No.
Mr. Epp. Yes. 9 yeas, 2 nays.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, you still have, oh,
I know.
what's that?
Motion to adjourn.
No, it goes to Heather, actually. She's got 5 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. So motion adopted. Motion to adjourn adopted. Now we go to Madam McPherson. You have 5 minutes and 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you wouldn't mind just giving me one moment here to get myself sorted out a little bit. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and apologize if we had you waiting for a little while. We know that, like many parts of the world, people in Latin America and the Caribbean face widespread human rights abuses, including gender-based violence and attacks on environmental and human rights defenders. Canada's feminist international assistance policy emphasizes human rights, gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls. Could you elaborate on how Canada ensures that its assistance programming prioritizes and addresses systematic human rights challenges, especially in the context of authoritarian regimes and conflict-affected regions?
Monsieur le Président, effectivement,
Chair, in fact, we are seeing a very worrisome trend in terms of human rights in many regions of the Latin American, Caribbean regions. For instance, we only have 126. There are 126 people that were murdered in recent months, and one victim is a high representative of Indigenous peoples. So this situation is very worrisome, and it's one of the reasons why we are closely involved in this specific issue. We are looking to promote and protect human rights, and that includes collaboration programs with Indigenous peoples. To give you a few examples of our efforts in the area, Canada has a project called At-Risk Areas. And through this program, Canadian diplomats involved in the area receive advice on how they can support and protect the defenders of human rights in the region, and they can also support human rights organizations and women's rights organizations so that they can receive funding, sustained funding that strengthens their organizations. Through that program, we fund more than $5 million in Peru, Honduras, Colombia, Guatemala, and Haiti, for instance. Perhaps one additional example, our diplomats in our foreign missions also occasionally take part in court proceedings, including the Santa Marta 5 in El Salvador, that were defending the environment and access to water. And during these court proceedings, our representatives, our embassy representatives, go to court to demonstrate that the international community is keeping close watch of these judicial processes.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you. Well, just one of my concerns that I have with regards to that particular example is we have heard from human rights defenders around Latin America and the region that have said that Canada has in fact not been there when they needed them to defend human rights defenders as per the legislation that we have. So I do have some concerns about that. And one of my concerns, I've spent some time in Nicaragua and other countries, but one of my concerns is that we have trade relationships that we often prioritize over human rights from my perspective. We know that there are significant trade relationships with several Latin American countries, and we have seen instances where the promotion of Canadian extractive industries or other trade priorities conflict with human rights or environmental protections. For example, Mining Watch and Amazon Watch have documented concerns raised by Indigenous communities regarding Canadian companies' conduct in the Amazon. Myself, I was in a small community in Nicaragua where it was spray painted on the fence, "Go Home Canada," because a Canadian mining company had poisoned the aquifer and made the community very, very ill. How is this government ensuring that trade priorities, particularly in the extractive sector, do not override the protection of human rights? And what concrete actions are being taken to make sure that you are addressing these ongoing concerns, particularly knowing that the core ombudsperson was never given the powers to compel testimony or witness as was promised by the government initially?
Monsieur le Président, je vais répondre le plus...
Chair, I'll answer as quickly as I can. the social responsibility of businesses abroad for Canada includes prevention, and it includes transparency, corruption, forced labor, child labor, as well as non-judicial mechanisms, including the ombudsperson, in order to encourage responsible business practices. We expect all parties involved in extraction to abide by the local laws and rules, and also share basic information or information based on evidence in an accessible and transparent fashion. For companies, we are very clear through our international representatives that we expect Canadian businesses to have exemplary practices and guidelines that follow the highest international standards, such as the UN guiding principles and the OECD guiding principles. We also work very hard on capacity building in the legislative arena to ensure that all stakeholders.
Very much for that. Now we go to Mr. Abel-Taif. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for appearing before committee this afternoon. How do you describe Canada's relationship to the Caribbean, to South and Central America?
Monsieur le Président, je peux...
Chair, perhaps I can start by speaking to the Caribbean. Canada and CARICOM have common economic interests, common values, such as democracy and human rights. The Caribbean area is one of the areas that is flourishing in terms of democratic institutions, including the rule of law. And there are over 2 million Canadians that go to the Caribbean every year. And there is an important diaspora here in Canada. So in this context, last year, we created a partnership, a strategic partnership with the Caribbean area that was confirmed during a leaders' summit, including Canada and leaders of CARICOM. And through this partnership, we work in a pan-government fashion at various levels in order to promote our common interests.
I expect a shorter answer, but thanks. China has done, within 25 years, between 2002, they had $18 billion business with the region. Now they have $450 billion. That's 2,500% growth. How have we done in Canada in the last 20 years, if we can compare dollar to dollar on trade?
Mr. Chair, we don't necessarily have the statistics for the last 20 years.
So why not?
Well, I can provide definitely some statistics on.
It would be nice if you can send us those figures. Sure. Now, the focus of the Canadian policy, if there's, by the way, is there a specific Canadian policy for this region or strategy that you can brief us on?
Mr. Chair, we don't have an explicit America strategy per se. Of course, we do have a strategic approach to the Americas. And I'm just trying to find my notes because I have that. We, of course, value our relationships in the hemisphere, and we have a strong focus there. Our strategic priorities for the region include strengthening democracy, encouraging inclusive economic growth and sustainable development, supporting poverty eradication, promoting and defending human rights, supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation, improving regional security, including addressing the root causes of irregular migration and supporting safe and orderly migration, and increasing opportunities for marginalized groups, in particular women and girls and Indigenous peoples.
Okay, with this approach, we see that the pink wave that took place in most of these countries toward more region or regimes that they're not democratic, they're moving toward more of a human rights abuse. And things basically that doesn't line up with our values. So how can we call that we have, this is the lead of our approach to the region, where the region is going in the opposite direction? What are we doing wrong?
Mr. Chair, obviously each country and the citizens of each country is free to choose its government, and we have seen different types of government being elected in various countries. Of course, as stated earlier, we are concerned with moves away from democracy and respect for human rights in a number of countries, and I think we've spoken about a couple of them already, such as Venezuela and Nicaragua. And while we continue to program in order to support democracy, to support human rights and the rule of law, Canada certainly cannot decide the direction or the future of government in another country.
There is probably over a dozen of ports that have been taken by the interest of China in the region. The latest is the $1.2 billion US dollars port in Peru. Is this any concern to Canada? Is this any concern to our current government as far as where China is expanding in the region, and what are we doing in opposite to make sure we counter that, since these countries are part of our continent?
Mr. Chair, the member, of course, raises an important point about China's large and growing presence in the region. It's the region's second largest trading partner behind the U.S., and for South America, it's the largest trading partner. And for many countries, China is seen as a valuable source of trade and investment, especially infrastructure investment, which is a significant need for the region. And Canada is working with partners to ensure that China's activities in the region do not undermine efforts to promote transparency, sound fiscal management, environmental protection, and the development of institutions that support democracy, human rights, and the rule of law.
Can you give an example, just one single example on those efforts, please, on the democratic efforts?
Democratic efforts. We work to support democracy in a number of countries.
I need the specifically, if you don't mind.
Oh.
Double tape.
Chair,
yes, if you could just provide us with follow-up specifics.
I can, Monsieur le Président, donc l'année.
Chair, last year, it was a very busy year in terms of elections, and Canada, through the OAS, supported 10 observation missions for elections held in the area, and that includes technical expertise through the Canadian programs.
Next, go to MP Zuberi. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses for being here today. I want to just, it's a bit lighter note from what you've been hearing thus far in terms of questions, and it's more historical fact or trivia almost. But I know that in the Caribbean there's been some conversations between Canada and other states about the closeness of relationships, and we respect the autonomy of each and every state. There's no question around that. It's come across just in general knowledge that there has been some conversation in Canada around Turks and Caicos in the past. I'm just wondering if what's the historical relationship between Canada and Turks and Caicos and other Caribbean islands?
Monsieur le Président, le Canada a une...
Chair, Canada has a long-standing relationship with the Caribbean, and as I mentioned earlier, that's why we created a strategic partnership. I am unable, however, to give you details on the historical relationship between Canada and Turks and Caicos, more specifically. We can come back to you with that.
And I appreciate that. To a more, I guess, a heavier subject, which is the norm of this committee. With respect to climate change and how that is a very present and concerning issue, the COP16 was held recently in Colombia last November. And just I'm curious about the outcomes from COP16 and how we as a country can work with regional partners to further those outcomes.
Mr. Chair, I can speak in general to the outcomes from COP16. Of course, that does not fall under mine or my colleagues' area of expertise, but we can certainly get more details. Participating countries at COP16 in October in Cali, Colombia, failed to reach an agreement on the establishment of a new global nature fund, which had been a proposal championed by developing countries. And there was criticism from proponents of the proposal, but progress was made with the adoption of a decision to examine options to enhance multilateral policy coherence on biodiversity and climate change and to better integrate nature and climate change actions. Canada is also working in partnership with the region on climate change and biodiversity. One of our most longstanding partners has been the Inter-American Development Bank Group through the establishment of the Canadian Climate Fund for the private sector in the Americas, the C2F 1 and 2, and the Canadian Net Zero and Climate Resilience Accelerator Fund. Canada's concessional finance is used to de-risk and catalyze private sector investments in climate change mitigation or adaptation projects. And these projects focus on renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate-smart agriculture, and pilot innovative approaches integrating gender, diversity, and inclusion in private sector operations. One example is the C2F2 supported 2 solar energy projects in Brazil, and it also used to use blended finance to achieve stronger gender outcomes by applying a performance-based incentive program to encourage private sector clients to integrate gender considerations into their operations.
You mentioned, I don't want to ask a follow-up question, but you mentioned around solar panels, and I'm just hopeful that we always look at the supply chains when we're involved in these sorts of green initiatives as it relates to forced labor, which is not the topic necessarily for here in this moment, but just to put on note. With respect to Indigenous peoples and in Latin America and in the Caribbean, how have we, have any best practices been shared from Canada to the region or vice versa? Can you share a bit about that if you have any info?
Peut-être, Monsieur le Président, je pourrais donner
Chair, I could probably give you an example that would bridge the gap with the previous question. At COP16, Canada also played a leadership role when it came to creating a subsidiary organization for Indigenous peoples in order to improve their engagement in the conference deliberations. So that's a best practice that Canada has been trying to implement in regional processes.
Perhaps just to add on to that, we, of course, work a lot of our development assistance. Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry.
Appreciate it. So now we go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes.
I won't be asking you questions on the 50 Shades of Grey of democracy in Brazil, since I think there's a bit of discomfort with answering that question. I will ask a question. During our recent study on Africa, we saw that there was an increasing influence of China in the continent. We're also seeing a parallel phenomenon in the Caribbean. Latin America is the second largest investment target for China outside of Asia. There's a mega port worth billions of dollars in Peru that would be able to reach China in 10 days. There are many hydroelectric programs. China has also built the largest powerhouse in Ecuador, in Argentina. There's a group corporation that's building 2 dams on the Santa Cruz River. And China has taken part in hydroelectric programs in Bolivia. That's also contributed to their grid. Is Canada worried by this increased presence of China in Latin America? And given that Canada and Quebec have a specific expertise in hydroelectricity, should we not make sure that we are present where the Chinese are taking our place?
Mr. Chair, of course, we're monitoring closely the increasing investment of China in the region. And as I mentioned previously, for many countries, China is a very important source of trade and investment. And most countries don't see relations with China and countries like Canada and other countries in the West as an either-or choice, and they don't want to feel forced to choose. But that being said, for Canada, of course, we use our network of embassies and of trade commissioners to promote Canadian trade and investment with the countries in the region. And competing with a country like China, an investor like China, means promoting the benefits that come from trade with a country like Canada, meaning our high-quality commercial and investment practices, which respect international standards and take into account growing trends like the environmental and social governance. So for countries interested in engaging in trading these areas, we are a partner of choice. And we, of course, continue to benefit from our network of free trade agreements and foreign investment protection agreements in the region. We have 8 of those, of each of those in the region.
Thank you. Madam McPherson, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to the witnesses for being here today. In the last section, when I was asking you some questions, there was a lot of discussion about the expectations that you have for Canadian companies abroad. The challenge I have, of course, is that we can expect all we want. If there is no enforcement, if there is no obligations for those companies, and at this moment in time, I believe we don't have very robust systems in place. So it is a concern that I have. You know, a recent 2023 Amazon Watch report was presented in Geneva at the United Nations Universal Periodical Review, and it highlights that 37 Canadian extractive projects in Latin America and the Caribbean have been linked to human rights abuses, environmental degradation, and violations of Indigenous peoples' rights, including cases of criminalization of human rights defenders and lack of access to justice. You know, when we talk about what we have expectations of these companies, if we are not able to hold them accountable through mechanisms like the core, I'm not sure how asking nicely is going to actually get us where we need to get. I'd like to know what measures Canada is taking to have direct collaborations with grassroots organizations to prevent further harm from happening and to uphold Indigenous and human rights in the region.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, Canada wants to ensure that rights are protected in the area. That's one of the founding principles of our feminist bent in our programs in many of the countries in the area. If I look at Guatemala, for instance, the vast majority of our development programs in the country target Indigenous peoples, especially in the most vulnerable areas of the country, which are sources of irregular migration and parts of the country that are also facing dilemmas in terms of how to find the right sources of economic development, including responsible and sustainable development for natural resources in the country. So through programs, through the risk-based programs that fight against crime in the area, I believe that's $31 million we've invested in the area. We are bringing together local organizations to work on raising awareness about rights and capacity building of local organizations, including women's organizations, so that they can better...
Considerably over the time limit. We next go to MP Epp. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I'm also going to give a shout out to the Library of Parliament for their background information as we kick off this study, which I have found very valuable in formulating my own line. I want to start actually picking up on the whole subject of trade. In your opening comments, you said Canada was a trusted partner, and I caught 2 statistics, 33% and 23%, of, if I believe that was an increased two-way trade. What was the time period? I missed the time period.
In the last 5 years.
In the last 5 years, and as further to my colleague, if you could table a little more historic data there as well. The reason I talk about trade, if trade is done right, it actually benefits both parties. Earlier in the backgrounder, it's 1950, Latin America had one of the youngest populations. It's projected to have one of the oldest by 2100. We heard in a recent study how Africa now has one of the youngest populations. Obviously, irregular migration is contributing to that. But there could also be another in that anywhere in the world, wherever increased development, increased wealth is concerned, usually the birth rate declines. Do you have a rough assessment of how much the projected decline in populations, and I recognize it's going to be variable across 39 countries, but broadly speaking, how much is due to irregular migration, and how much is actually due to increasing wealth of countries and declining birth rates?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I don't have that information with us. I believe if we took the region as a whole, considering much of the migrants do stay in the region, at least in the example of Venezuelan migrants, it's hard to quantify that because a lot of it is irregular migration as well. So there aren't specific numbers, although there are estimates. But we would have to look into that and get back to you.
Do you have any forecasts for increased trade with the region?
I don't have. Do you have? I don't think we have any information on in terms of forecasts. We would have to look at time period and a number of factors.
So let's look forward a little bit and specifically kind of engaging with our diplomatic footprint, which hopefully would lead to enhanced relationships and trade. Right now, there's 39 countries in the region. We've got 48 missions in 25 countries. Is the hope that we become broader based, or we actually focus our efforts in the areas where we can actually have a benefit to both countries, largely starting with trade, I guess is where I would start. What is the thought process moving forward? Are we trying to spread ourselves more thinly, or like we have in their Africa report, focus our resources?
Mr. Chair, the department regularly looks at our footprint and our representation internationally, including in the region. And of course, we want to make the best use of the resources we have to ensure that they're addressing and promoting Canadian interests in the region. We have, of course, trade resources, trade promotion resources, as well as others, including consular programs, our diplomacy program, development assistance. So all of those lines of business, as well as the presence of other departments outside of global affairs, such as IRCC and others, are taken as a whole in terms of how we determine our presence and the way we spread those resources in the region.
Thank you. I guess the reason I asked that question, because quoting right out of the departmental plan for 23-24, it states, quote, "The department will engage with new and traditional regional partners to promote democracy, human rights, and rule of law where they're under threat." I don't see trade in there. And so are those going to be the three measures where we're going to focus our efforts? Is trade at all being considered?
Mr. Chair, of course, trade is a very important part of our international programming and our international planning and engagement.
Thank you. So you also referenced the upcoming Summit of the Americas.
Yes.
That's going to be Dominican Republic. What will be Canada's focus going into that meeting? Enhanced trade relationships? What are the other areas that we're going to be kind of bringing to that meeting, which I think is our next opportunity?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Summit of the Americas is happening actually a year from now. The Dominican Republic as host will put forward some proposed themes for that meeting. We haven't actually received any proposals from the Dominican Republic yet, but we will be watching it closely and engaging.
I understand the host country has some latitude,
Yeah.
but what's our goal going into it?
Our goal is, Mr. Chair, will be along the lines of our broad engagement in the region. So issues such as promoting democracy, promoting prosperity, inclusive prosperity. Thank you.
Very much, Ms. Druquier. And for the last question, we go to Dr. Fry. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really thrilled we're doing this study because I come from one of those countries, a Caribbean country. And I wanted to ensure that as we look at this, we do not necessarily lump the Caribbean excluding Haiti and Cuba, with Latin America, because many of the Caribbean countries are democratic countries. They have a British parliamentary system. Because of colonialization by the British, they tend to be quite stable. But I do want to ask a question, and there are not many indigenous people in the Caribbean countries. There are in Latin America. And I am proud to say that in 2021, when Canada was a country that took the rights of indigenous peoples to the Durban Conference, and we won it. America was the only country that voted against it, and as a result, we had UNDRIP, which was written by a lot of Canadian scholars like Willie Littlechild. But I just want to say that I want to know, what is the progress of indigenous peoples in Latin America? How have they fared? How are they faring? I also wanted to talk a little bit about democracy. Has Canada considered working with some of the Caribbean countries, the quote-unquote British Caribbean countries, to move forward the agenda on democracy? And finally, what are we doing on the issue of drugs? Because what has taken over both the Caribbean, even though it's democratic, the Caribbean countries, and Latin America, is the drug trade. And you were very right when you said that organized crime has actually usurped the role of governance in those countries, being bullies and completely taking over everything. I know that in my country of Trinidad and Tobago, the Venezuela and Latin America imports drugs across that very narrow strip of water, and there is a huge number of drug cartels going on in some of these Caribbean countries. What are you doing about the drug cartels?
Monsieur le Président, je peux commencer en disant...
Chair, perhaps I can start. I'll start by saying that the best example we have of working with the CARICOM community on improving democracy in the area is in Haiti. For the first time in our engagement with Haiti over the past 2 years, we've been working closely with CARICOM. There are 3 representatives that we call the 3 wise men. They were 3 former prime ministers of the countries that advise Haiti on finding constructive solutions to the current political and governance issues. Given that they're from the same region, it gives them more credibility, more legitimacy. Now, with respect to indigenous rights, when I was the ambassador in Ecuador, Chief Littlechild came to the embassy to talk about the reconciliation process in Canada and the 94 calls to action, and how these 94 calls to action were implemented by various sectors of the Canadian society. And that was a great model that was used to inspire some approaches in Ecuador. So that's a concrete example of how we are working with them. And if I can answer the last question regarding security,
Oui, c'est ça. Région de...
Latin America is the largest in terms of cocaine production and more synthetic drugs as well. So we have a vast program to reduce crime that's widespread in the area. It inspects containers in ports and works with Interpol at the borders, and our colleagues from the RCMP and National Defense are part of the programs to improve security in the region and to reduce drug trafficking.
Chair, how much time do I have left?
Dr. Fred.
Chair?
20 seconds?
20 seconds?
Yes.
Okay, I cannot ask a question during that time, but I wanted to say that I'm extremely proud of the role that Canada played in bringing up UNDRIP to the United Nations on the rights of Indigenous peoples in the New World. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry. At this point, on behalf of the entire committee, I'd like to thank you very much, Ms. Drukier and Ms. Bedard. We're very grateful for your time and for your expertise. Now, as members are aware, we do have committee business. I will suspend for approximately 4 to 5 minutes just to allow us to go in camera. Thank you.